Haló, matin agus fescarma. Falcha gu Gaelic le Joseph. Is misha Joseph. Hamia nan alaba. Hamia fudach an am paslich. Ha u jonsachach Gaelic. Seo ha podcast acum. Welcome everyone if you're joining us for the first time. We're currently revising lessons or podcasts 1 to 10, which were made last year. And today we're going to revise the verb to be. The verb to be is made with ha, me, I am. For example, me fuar, I'm cold. Me fluach, I'm wet. So let's just go over the pronouns for the verb to be. Me fuar, I am cold. U fuar, you are cold. Fuar, he is cold. Fuar, she is cold. Shin fuar, we are cold. Sibh fuar, you plural are cold. Iat fuar, they are cold. Now, it's very important to remember that if you're talking to polite people, then you have to use sibh for the singular as well as the plural. So, for example, if you're talking to someone older or your father or in business, it would be ha sibh fuar, not ha u fuar. We use the plural for the singular and plural in very polite situations. Otherwise, you can simply say ha u. So, ha me, ha u, ha I, ha shin, ha sibh, ha iat. This is the verb to be in Gaelic. Now, of course, there's ways you can use emphasizers. For example, misha for me, thusa for you. But we'll come on to that when we need to. Right now, I want to tell you that although this is a verb to be, we don't say me Joseph, for example. For introductions, we always use is me, is misha Joseph. That's the correct way to say I'm Joseph. Is misha Joseph. But we only use this for introductions. For everything else, it's me or u, as we've been revising. Now, if you want a full lesson on that, go back to lesson 3 and lesson 4 in the podcast. These lessons we're doing at the moment are to revise the ones we've done previously before we move on. Now, if you're looking for a faster way to learn Gaelic, then I suggest you go to the YouTube channel Gaelic with Jason, because he's much faster. This way of learning Gaelic with me is very slow, because many people are afraid of Gaelic and they want to take it very slowly. That's why we did 10 basic lessons, and now we are revising those lessons. We just spoke about the verb to be. I am, you are, he or she or it. We also looked at we, you, and they. It's very easy if you want to make it into the past tense. You just replace ha with va, va. Now, fuar sounds like it begins with an H, but it doesn't. It's actually THA. And in the past tense, it becomes va, which is BHA. I'll write all of these in the podcast notes, so you don't have to worry about remembering them right now. So let's just go over this one more time. Now, I just need to point out that everything in the Gaelic world is masculine or feminine, okay? So it's going to be or e, okay? So let's go over this one more time. The verb to be, hami. So in the past tense, that becomes vami. I was. Hami fluach. I'm wet. Vami fluach. I was wet. Fluach. He is wet. Or it is wet. And then you also have the past tense of that, where you can say va, va. Okay, so hami, ha-e, ha-i, ha-u, ha-shin, ha-shiv, ha-it. This is the present tense of the verb to be, and in the past tense it would be vami, vai, or vae, vau, vashin, vashiv, and vaiet. Now is a good time to start talking about the letter H. The letter H is something which is added to words when the previous word ends in a certain way. Now, there's all kinds of rules about this, and we'll talk about the rules in the future. But right now, all you need to know is that when an H appears, this is called lenition. Lenition. And when it's added to other letters, it sometimes can make them silent, or it can change the sound. Let me give you an example. Let's look at the name Mairie. Mairie. The name Mairie, if I'm talking about Mairie, is simply going to be Mairie. But if I want to call to Mairie, I'm going to say, haló, Mhairie, because I have to put an H in because there was an A before the word. So, for example, if Mairie is introducing herself, she would say, is Misha Mairie? But if I want to call to her then, I would say, haló, Mhairie. The H goes in because of the A. This sounds very complex, but it's not. You just need to know that the H is there, and it appears after certain letters. Let's look at some more letters which are lenited. So, for example, mhòr, mhòr, becomes fhuar, fhuar, because the E means that the next word has an H added to it. Okay, let's try another one. Beag, beag, bheag, bheag. And what's happening here is that we put an H in and the pronunciation changes. Let's try this just one more time, okay? So, ha mhòr, ha fhuar. He's big, he's very big. Ha beag, ha bheag. Because the word gle has an E, a lenition happens in the next word. This is something to look out for because it's very common and can also make bits of words silent. For example, fuar can become fhuar, and you can see the F and the H have been taken away completely. So the whole sounds of words and names can begin to disappear because of lenition. So you have to be very careful with this. This is just a general introduction to lenition, and we'll talk more about it in the coming days. In our last lesson, we looked at how to say that you have something. You can say acum. Ha podcast acum is the podcast at me, literally, which means my podcast. The podcast is at me, it's my podcast. But we also introduced the other way of doing this with family members, which is using mo, my, mo. So, for example, the word for son in Gaelic is mac. We hear it before names like MacDonald, MacTaggart, MacTavish, and it just means son of. However, if we use it with mo, o, then lenites the word coming. So it becomes not mo mac, but mo vac, just like Mairie becomes Mhairie. Now there's additional rules concerning an H which goes in later in the word, as I recall. Or at least there's some change later in some of these words, particularly with names. But when we come to look at this in more depth, I'll tell you about it. But right now, all you need to know is sometimes an H goes in based upon the previous letter or the final letter of the previous word, and because of that, it causes the word to change. But we'll look more at that as we go forward. Let's just recap on what we've done so far. Matin va agus fesker ma. Good morning and good afternoon. Is Misha Joseph. I'm Joseph. Ha podcast acum. My podcast, or falcha gu podcast acum. This is my podcast. We spoke about the verb to be, which is ha. And then we spoke about the past tense, which is formed with va, B-H-A. So the present is T-H-A, and the past is B-H-A. Then we use some examples. For example, va mi fuar, ha fhuar. And then we spoke about lenition, words which lenite. Mairie becomes Mhairie, mhòr becomes fhuar, beag becomes bheag. And lenition is something which will be explained another time, but it's very, very important in Gaelic because it changes the sounds of the words. It doesn't change the writing, except it adds an H, but in speaking, some of those parts of the words can vanish. For example, fuar becomes uar. O ha fhuar anju, ha ag le uair. So it is very cold. It is cold. Yes, it is very cold. It is cold. Yes, it is very cold. And with very cold, you can see that the F and the H become silent. I suppose it's a little bit like if somebody said, oh, it's cold. Oh, yes, it's very old today. If they were dropping the letter C, for example. It's something similar to this. So it can cause a problem if you don't get the pronunciation right. But with more complex grammar, lenition can become very, very hard. So we need to deal with that in a separate lesson. There we are. That's all from me now. Chidi and Drasda. Until next time.